She was a giver. She didn't deserve it. I could hear her screaming, "Help me, help me." Oh, it was horrible.
Someone really meant for somebody to die in this fire.
In the early hours of June 19, 2004, Kristina Soult died inside her own home in Turlock, California. The fire was no accident. Both porches were burning at once. Think about what that means. Someone had planned this. The woman who did it was not a stranger. She was a rival, the other woman in a love triangle that had been building for months. Police spent weeks on the wrong leads. The break, when it came, would hinge on something she never thought to control. Stay with me. Here is how it all came apart. To understand how it happened, we have to go back to the night the fire was set. Before we go any further, drop a quick comment and let me know. What are you doing right now while you listen? Driving, cooking, winding down for the night? I would love to hear it. Just a quick note, this story is based on real events, with some details adjusted for storytelling. The message is what matters most. The front window blew in before Joey Lopes was fully awake. Glass and smoke and heat arriving in the same breath. Joey was 17, sleeping on the living room couch of his mother's Turlock home, and he came up from sleep already moving. The ceiling had disappeared behind a rolling gray mass. Orange light pushed hard through the front of the house. The glass was gone. The smoke was already inside, heavy near the floor and thickening. He shouted. He got people moving. Kristina Soult was already in the hallway. A family friend was near the back of the house. Someone had to take the baby Kristina's grandson, there for the night, and Joey took him. He moved toward the back door because the front was already lost. The body refuses heat before the mind can form the instruction. Kristina was 43 years old and wearing only a t-shirt. She had spent the evening the way she spent most evenings, making sure everyone else was settled before she rested. She moved through the smoke without slowing. At the back door, she stopped. She turned to Joey and placed the baby in his arms. No words, no instructions. Just the child, placed carefully, and then she turned back toward the hallway. "Get out," Joey told her. She was already moving. It took less than 10 seconds. The smoke closed behind her. Outside, the air still held the warmth of a June night beneath the burning. Joey stood on the grass with the baby. The family friend was beside him. The front of the house pulsed orange, and the air near the foundation carried a different smell, something sharp and chemical beneath the wood smoke. A smell that had no business being at a house fire. Keep that detail. She had a clear path out. She turned away from it. Gracie Olson came around the corner at a run. Gracie was Kristina's neighbor and a close friend. He was pulled from sleep by her brother's call. "Open your door! Look out! Your friend's house is on fire!" She had left the phone on the bed and run. She heard Kristina before she saw anything. "Help me! Help me!" The words came from inside, through smoke pouring from a window too small and too high to reach. They were identical each time. Not rising, not trailing off, just repeating. Raw and even, at the same flat pitch. Gracie moved toward the sound. There was nowhere to go. And then the screaming stopped. Not gradually. All at once, the way a signal cuts dead, and the only sound that remained was the fire, working through the house at its own pace. Gracie stood in the dark with nothing to do with her hands. The silence that followed would take investigators weeks to explain, and months before they understood who put it there. The silence Gracie Olson was left standing in did not belong to an accident. It would take investigators weeks to prove that, but it started here, in the dark, beside a house still burning, in a neighborhood that was only now waking up to the smell. Kristina Soult had moved to Turlock after 2 marriages that did not last. She came with her sons, a practical temperament, and a habit of putting other people first before she put herself anywhere at all. She found work as a waitress and built her regulars the old way, by showing up, by knowing the order before the customer sat down, by being exactly the kind of server people came back and asked for by name. She was beloved by them, not warmly tolerated, specifically requested. Her elder son, Michael, remembered the Sundays most clearly. She would put a record on something she liked, something slow, and teach him calligraphy at the kitchen table. The two of them spending an afternoon the way people spend afternoons that feel permanent because there is no reason yet to think otherwise. He talked about her afterward in the present tense and would catch himself mid-sentence. Her grandson was small enough that she still carried him on some days. She took him to the park, to the grocery store, wherever she could manage at his pace, in no hurry. She also had a plan. Her brother was already in Las Vegas. The job market was better there, and she had been making calls, working through a timeline, moving toward an actual departure date, not daydreaming, doing. She was not someone who dramatized difficulty. She had weathered 2 marriages, a move across the state, years of working on her feet in a job that asked more patience than most. She kept going. She always had. She had a grandson who counted on her presence, a son who looked forward to those Sunday afternoons. A plan with a real timeline behind it. None of that was enough to protect her. In the weeks before her death, she had been doing what she always did, showing up, taking care of the people around her, living a life modest in its daily details and irreplaceable to the people inside it. That is the part that gets lost when a case becomes a case. There was a detail from 3 months earlier that no one had thought to connect to anything. In the early morning hours of March 2004, a small fire had broken out on Kristina's front porch. Investigators came, examined the scene, noted a coffee can near the door that had been used as an ashtray for cigarette butts, and
Help me.
ruled the fire accidental. The report was written up and filed. Kristina moved on from it. Nobody pressed the matter further. Nobody thought to ask whether it would happen again. At daybreak on June 19, there would be a reason to start asking. The investigators were already inside what remained of the house by the time daylight reached Turlock, and the house was already telling them something the March report had not. They worked the back porch first. The door there was newer metal, not wood, and its exterior face had been completely warped by heat. The paint was gone. Not peeled away cleanly, burned off, reduced to a faint gray residue still clinging to the metal in the shape of what had been there. Below the warping, in the char on the porch surface, was a splash pattern, the kind that does not come from burning wood or a knocked-over ashtray. The kind that comes from something poured. They moved to the front porch. The same signature was waiting for them. 2 separate points of origin, one at the back, one at the front. The house had 2 ways in and 2 ways out, and both of them had been set alight before anyone inside was fully awake, before anyone had a chance to reach them. The damage was not random. The splash patterns on both porches described the same deliberate motion, something liquid applied with intent, at 2 separate locations. Before the fire was lit, investigators documented the structure roughly 3/4 of the home destroyed. The rooms that had not fully burned were not standing in any useful condition. Smoke and heat had saturated every surface. The charring was so complete, so pervasive, that there were no items and no areas left that could yield a fingerprint. Whoever had been at this house in the hours before it lit was not going to be found in what remained of it. This was not a fire that got out of hand. This was a fire that was designed. Whoever set it had come to this house knowing the layout, knowing both exits, knowing that the front and back needed to be addressed before the first flame caught, and that each location needed enough accelerant to hold. That kind of knowledge is not accidental, it is acquired. Kristina had been found in the bathroom. Her body was in a fetal position. There was a towel across her face, the last act of a person still trying to filter the air, still trying to stay low, still fighting a fire she had no way to escape. The bathroom had no exit. It had only offered a door she could close against the smoke. The investigation had 2 confirmed starting points: no fingerprints and a woman dead in a sealed house. What it did not yet have was a reason or a name. Both were waiting outside in the early light, where the neighborhood had started to gather. Joey Lopes had been on his feet since the fire, watching investigators move through what had been his mother's home. He had answered the first round of questions in the shock of those early hours. When detectives sat him down,
And he says, open your door and look out your front porch. Your friend's house is on fire.
second time, more formally, he did not wait. He already had someone in mind. Joey Lopes had not slept. He sat across from detectives at Turlock Police Department in the hours after the fire, carrying the specific weight of someone who had gotten out while his mother had not. He walked them through the sequence without being prompted. The window coming in, smoke already rolling across the ceiling when he came up from the couch, his mother already in the hallway. He had taken Kristina's grandson. The boy was there for the night and gotten everyone moving toward the back because the front was already gone. At the back door, she had placed the baby in his arms and turned around. He had tried to stop her. She had already made her choice. The smoke closed between them as the door opened. He had tried to go back in once the door shut. The knob had burned him before he finished reaching for it. Not hard, but enough to tell him what the heat on the other side meant. He stood there for a moment anyway. He told the detectives all of this without pause and without looking away. He was carrying it. He was not going to set it down here. He also told them the house had burned before. Front porch, 3 months earlier. Investigators had come and called it an accident, a coffee can used as an ashtray, the report had said. He had believed that at the time. He was sitting here now, and he was not sure he believed it anymore. He had gone along with the ruling. He had not known what else to do with it. The room was quiet. Joey had been awake since before the window came in. He was not done. He had gotten out. She had not. And now he was sitting across a table in a police station, working through a theory that began with a terrible possibility. What if the fire had not been meant for her at all? He had been cooperating with police on a gang-related matter in the months before the fire. The word had gotten around, the way those things get around, not delivered to him directly, but communicated clearly enough that he had started watching his back. He told them he felt marked. He told them he had been careful, and it had not been enough. The fire had started near the front of the house, near where he slept. He kept returning to that. He gave detectives a name, a specific gang member he believed had reason to want him gone. The fire had started at his end of the house. Detectives wrote the name down. They left the interview with a timeline, a gang theory, and a porch fire that now needed a second look. What they did not have was the call that would make the gang theory irrelevant. It came the next morning. Anonymous, male, and it had nothing to do with any gang. The call had come in the morning. A man's voice, anonymous, gave them a name, Suze Adams. He did not give his own. Detectives went to AJ's cafe. The owner confirmed that Suze Adams worked his line and had done so since she came to Turlock. She had not come in that morning. The caller had. David Jean worked the station beside Suze at AJ's cafe, close enough to hear things she probably assumed would never leave the kitchen. He sat at the counter and did not wait to be asked. She said she was the one who did it to the March fire, he told them. She told me not to tell anyone. He had kept that confidence for 3 months, not in March, when Kristina's front porch burned and the fire department ruled it accidental. Not in the weeks that followed, when Suze began asking him questions he could not explain away. He had held it until the morning after a woman was dead. After that, she started asking me things, David Jean said. How to make a Molotov cocktail, how to make a pipe bomb. She was serious. He said it the way people speak after carrying something too long, not urgent, just level, like setting something down. The kitchen ran around them. Orders came in. The sounds of an ordinary working morning pressed against a conversation about murder. 2 days before the other fire. Kristina came into the cafe and ate here. That set Suze off. The detectives had been working a gang theory since the night before. That theory gave them a direction. This gave them a reason, and reason is far more dangerous than direction. David Jean was not finished. They were both dating the same man, he said. Fortino Godoy had been for years. Fortino Godoy had been with Kristina Soult for nearly 16 years, and for at least 4 of those years, he had also been with Suze Adams. David Jean laid it out evenly. He had not come to make a case. He had come to say what he knew. Suze had his baby. Gave it up. After that, things between them got bad. A pause. She hated her, that's what I know. That was enough to move on. Detectives walked out of AJ's cafe with a named suspect, a documented motive, and a fact they had not expected. The March fire had never been an accident. Suze Adams had told a coworker she set it, watched the fire department close the case, and said nothing. She had waited 3 months to come back. Now they needed to find her. They had her name, her workplace, her motive, and the account of the man who had been standing next to her the whole time. What they did not yet have was any physical evidence that could hold the theory once a lawyer started pulling at it. They had a name they could use and a lead they still had to close. Before detectives could move on Suze Adams, they needed to work through what Joey Lopes had given them. The gang member he believed had marked him. That lead had to be cleared or confirmed. Nothing in the case could advance until it was. The gang member Joey named was already in county custody on an unrelated charge when detectives came to interview him. That made access simple. It also clarified one thing at the outset. A man behind bars before the fire was set is not a man standing outside a house with a container of accelerant. They interviewed him anyway. The session was methodical. Detectives walked through it. Any connection to the fire at Kristina's home, any friction with Joey, any reason someone in his network might have acted on his behalf while he sat in a cell. He answered the questions. He gave them nothing useful. He said he didn't know anything about the fire, investigators would note. Said he had no reason to be at odds with Joey. A denial is not the same as a clearing. But when the investigation went to work on it, no physical evidence emerged, placing him or anyone connected to him near the house on June 19. No contact records, no associate with motive, access, or opportunity. No thread that pulled toward anything real. The session had its own particular quality. Not charged, not dramatic, just flat. A conversation in a county jail room. Questions asked and answered. And then nothing. Detectives walked out with less than they had come in with. The lead had felt solid. The lead was nothing. And the investigation was back where David Jean's account had left it. One named suspect, one witness, and no physical evidence in hand. There was nothing to connect him or anyone around him to what happened at that house. Joey had handed over the theory in good faith. Fear has its own logic when someone has been cooperating with law enforcement and something catastrophic follows. The mind reaches for the most available explanation. The gang theory had been available, it just wasn't right. The gang theory was done. 2 days into the investigation, detectives had cleared the gang lead and confirmed no link between that world and the fire at Kristina Soult's home. They had Suze Adams as the name that had outlasted every other theory. They had motive, they had a witness. What they did not yet have was her. And before they could move...
And, he doesn't know anything about the fire, and said he didn't know anything about it, and was innocent.
Ellie in her direction. One more name needed to be cleared. Joey had also mentioned his half-brother, Mike Vanek, who had recently been asked to leave Kristina's home and who some believed thought she owed him something. That interview was next. It would not take long. Mike Vanek pulled his chair in and started talking before detectives had finished settling their notebooks. Mike Vanek, 33, Kristina Soult's stepson, had recently been asked to leave her home over a dispute that detectives initially flagged as motive. He sat with his hands flat on the table. No lawyer, no hesitation. The argument wasn't with her, he said. It was about the landlord situation. He explained it plainly. There had been friction over the living arrangement, a conflict that had escalated not between him and Kristina, but around the circumstances of the tenancy. She had not thrown him out in anger. The situation had resolved the way these things resolve, and he had gone. There was no residue of bitterness that he offered, and detectives found none they could verify. He had an alibi for the night of June 18. He gave it without prompting. The details checked. What detectives had not expected was what came next. She was supposed to be watching my son, Vanek said. He had made that arrangement before the fire. Kristina had agreed to look after his son that weekend, the same weekend she died. He had been counting on her. His son had been counting on her. And now he was sitting in a police interview room, explaining that he had not killed the woman he had been planning to entrust with his child. The room had flat acoustics, the kind that absorbs sound without returning it. His voice did not break, but there was a particular stillness in it. The stillness of someone who has not yet found the right shape for what he is carrying. He was grieving. He had an alibi. He had been planning to leave his son with her. Grief does not always look the way people expect. It had arrived here in the wrong room. In a conversation structured to determine whether he had a reason to want her dead, detectives verified what he had told them. The alibi held. The money dispute, such as it had been, left no trace in the evidence. The forced departure from the home dissolved on contact with the facts. There was no documented animosity, no financial motive.
I didn't know why the house was on fire. I didn't know who did it and that I was working.
Could survive scrutiny. No thread connecting Vaniek to two deliberate burn points on those porches. He walked out. The room was empty. 3 names had come through the investigation in under a week. A gang member already locked up, a stepson with a clean alibi and a grief he had not asked for, and a woman named Suze Adams who had never come in at all somewhere in Turlock, while the case assembled itself around her absence. Every name that cleared made hers harder to look past. David Jean's account was still the only thing standing. Detectives needed all of it, on record, in one place. That was the next door to walk through. David Jean had already given them the shape of it. Now detectives needed the full structure. They sat across from him at AJ's cafe a second time, notebooks open. The kitchen behind him was running the same as it always had. He spoke in the same measured register, not rushed, not reluctant, just delivering what he knew in the order he had known it. The March fire had come first. "She told me she did it," David Jean said. "She told me not to say anything." He had done what she asked. He told no one. The fire department ruled it accidental and the case closed. And Suze Adams had watched that happen and said nothing to anyone but him. David Jean had held it for 3 months, the knowledge that the fire labeled accidental was nothing of the kind. What came after March was harder to explain away. In the weeks that followed, she started asking him questions, specific, practical, operational questions. He was a coworker, not an expert, and he had told her as much. He did not know how to make what she was asking about. It had not mattered to her. She wanted to know how to make a Molotov cocktail, he told detectives. Then she asked about pipe bombs. She was not distressed when she asked. She was not in crisis. She asked the way a person asks when they are looking for a piece of information they do not yet have, patiently, methodically, returning to it. He had not helped her. He did not have what she wanted, but he had not reported it either. He had absorbed the questions and stayed quiet and kept working beside her, while she kept asking. The questions ran through spring, into June, until 2 days before everything ended. She wasn't venting. She was researching. June 16. Kristina Soult came into AJ's cafe, sat down, and ordered a meal. She did not appear to know Suze was on shift. David Jean watched from across the counter. Suze saw her the moment she walked in. He described what he saw without editorializing. Suze's attention went to Kristina and did not leave. She did not approach, she did not speak, she did not move toward the door. She stood at her station and watched a woman eat and said nothing the entire time Kristina was in the building. The rage was quiet. That was the part that stayed with him. Kristina finished her meal and left. Suze went back to her work the way a person does when they have already decided something. 2 days later, the house burned. Detectives had a complete timeline now, confession after March, weapons questions through spring, a documented flashpoint 48 hours before the fire. The sequence had stopped looking like coincidence. It looked like a schedule that had been running for months. Now they needed to go to where Suze Adams lived and see what she had left behind. The warrant had been signed. Detectives were at the door before Suze Adams had a reason to expect them. She was present when they entered. They moved through the apartment room by room, methodical, unhurried, looking for anything that tied the woman who lived there to 2 deliberate fire starts on the porches of a house across Turlock. They checked the interior, the closets, the kitchen. No accelerant, nothing that announced itself, nothing that looked like the residue of something planned. They moved toward the back of the apartment and came out onto the porch. The rosemary bush was there. It was growing in a container, green, fragrant, sharp-smelling in the late June heat. It was the kind of thing that would be unremarkable on any other porch, but investigators had already recovered a Ziploc bag from a trash can in the alley behind Kristina's home. The bag held plant material and a liquid with an unusual odor. The rosemary on Susie's porch matched what was in that bag. The smell matched, the plant matched. It was not nothing. It was not enough. A rosemary bush is a common plant. It grows in containers on porches across Turlock, across California, in windowsills and back gardens throughout the state. A match between foliage and material from an alley is not a fingerprint. There is no receipt, no witness who placed her at the scene. The law does not convict on matching herbs, and everyone standing on that porch understood this perfectly. Detectives documented the bush. They noted its position, its condition, its smell. They photographed it. They had done everything the warrant authorized. The bush was in the evidence record. The bush was not an arrest. What do you do when the evidence points at someone and the law says it isn't enough? Suze Adams was interviewed on site. She sat down across from detectives without being asked. She was composed. She told them she had been home the entire night of June 18. She had not left. She had been asleep. "I was home all night," she said. "Fortino was with me." She named Fortino Godoy as her alibi without hesitation, the man at the center of all of it, offered now as the thing standing between her and a charge. She produced the alibi with the same composure she had shown when detectives first came through the door. Detectives had a coworker's account, a documented motive, a rosemary bush on a porch, and a Ziploc bag from an alley. What they did not have was a charge that would survive an arraignment. The gap between what they knew and what they could prove was the exact width of the door she walked out of. Suze Adams walked out. The door closed. Detectives stood on a porch that smelled of rosemary and held nothing they could take to court. She was free, and within days she would leave Turlock entirely. The investigation had no direction to travel. Suze Adams was free. The rosemary documented, the case file open. Detectives had a witness, a documented pattern, and a legal wall they could not breach. They had done everything the warrant permitted. The warrant had not been enough. Nothing changed. The days after the search settled into a quiet that felt worse than noise. Every available lead had been run to its end. The gang member was cleared. The stepson was cleared. David Jean's full account was in the record, and the rosemary match was in the record beside it. What the record did not contain was a charge, an arrest, or a legal path forward. The case sat the way cases sit when the investigation has found the right person and cannot prove it still. Heavy, and pointed at a name that kept not being enough. AJ's Cafe kept its schedule in the days that followed. Orders came in, orders went out. Suze Adams had a station on the line and, for a while, she had filled it. Then she stopped. She missed a shift. The owner noticed someone had to cover. He tried to reach her. No answer. Another shift came. She was not there. He had hired her, had her in his kitchen for years, and now she was simply absent. She just stopped coming in, he said. He went through the regular steps. He called the number on her personnel file. The line rang and rang. He moved her shifts. No call, no notice, no forwarding information. The station she had worked stood empty without explanation. Some workers disappear between shifts because life catches up with them. Bad luck, a move, a sudden change. Detectives knew this was not that. She didn't run. She just left. The apartment was empty when investigators came to look. Neighbors had nothing. No one in any circle connected to Suze Adams had a current location, a number that answered, a reason she had gone. She had been inside the investigation's reach, questioned, released, documented, and then she had dissolved out of Turlock the way a person does when they have decided not to be findable. There was no forwarding address at the apartment. She was gone the way smoke is gone, no longer present, but the smell of it still in the room. Investigators could not charge an absence. They could not compel a woman they could not locate. They had everything they needed to build a case, and nothing they needed to close one. The file held her name. Turlock continued through July without her. 2 weeks. The investigation held that shape-named suspect. No address, no action. Then, on July 2nd, Suze Adams came back. She walked in on her own. July 2nd, 2004. 2 weeks after she had dissolved out of Turlock without a trace, Suze Adams appeared in the lobby of the police department. No summons, no appointment, no warning. A call went across the detective floor. She was at the front desk. She was waiting. Her hair was different. She had cut it short and dyed it blonde. Under the lobby lights, she looked less like someone who had been the subject of an active investigation and more like someone who had just come back from somewhere warm. Her posture was easy. Her hands were visible. She showed no sign of a woman who had spent the past 2 weeks being looked for. Detectives came down and she sat with them. They asked where she had been. "I just went to Mexico," she said. "I needed a break. I'm back now." She offered the explanation without hesitation. There were no specifics that could be checked on the spot. No hotel name, no dates anchored to anything verifiable, no itinerary she was asked to produce. Mexico was somewhere she had been. That was the explanation. She gave it the way a person gives a reason that is also a dismissal. She was cooperative. She answered what was asked. She did not appear nervous in any way that could be documented. She had been away. She was back. And she had come in to let them know. "I want to help however I can," she said. "I have nothing take hood." Detectives had spent 2 weeks unable to locate her. She had ended that search by walking through the front door. The question that settled over the room, the one investigators would carry out of the building with them, was whether that move was reckless or calculated. She wasn't turning herself in. She was taking over the investigation. Before the interview ended, Suze Adams offered something more. She would take a polygraph examination, not because investigators had asked her to. They had not yet. She volunteered it, and she chose the date August 4, 2004. There are suspects who resist polygraphs. There are suspects who agree to them under pressure. Suze Adams scheduled her own. She picked the calendar date, set the appointment.
So you didn't mean for her to die, you just wanted her to leave you alone.
Out of the station on the same terms she had walked in, on her own initiative, at a time of her choosing. 33 days separated that lobby from August 4. Detectives had a polygraph date, a Mexico story they could not immediately verify, and a suspect who had handed them the appearance of full cooperation while keeping complete control of the timeline. She had changed her appearance, crossed a border, and returned to a department that had been searching for her. And she had done all of it as though none of those things were in conflict. August 4. What happened on that day would determine everything. The 33 days were not empty. Detectives used the waiting period to assemble the full shape of something they had understood only in pieces until now. Fortino Godoy had been with Kristina Soult for 16 years. That was the documented baseline. Suze Adams had entered the picture somewhere between 4 and 6 years before the fire. For years, 2 women in the same small city had been with the same man, and each had known the other was there. They had moved through the same Turlock, and the knowledge between them was not vague. It had been precise, persistent, and mutual. Neither had left. That was the detail investigators kept coming back to. This was not 2 women who had stumbled into each other's existence and been shattered by what they found. They had known. They had stayed. The competition between them had not ignited from a single revelation it had been chosen. The competition carried forward and sharpened year by year in a city small enough that they occupied the same physical space. Each had decided that staying was worth more than leaving. Neither had ever been right about that calculation. And then the full picture of Fortino's life came into focus. He had a wife in Mexico. He had children there. Every week, a portion of his earnings left Turlock and crossed the border to reach them. The life he was building in California, both versions of it, with Kristina and with Suze, was being maintained alongside a family that neither woman in Turlock had known the full extent of. Both women had been building on a foundation that belonged to someone else. Neither had what she believed she had. The man they had competed over for years carried a prior claim that made both of their positions secondary. China had organized 16 years around a man who was not available in the way she believed. Suze had done the same, with 4 to 6. Investigators spread the file across a desk. 16 years, 4 to 6, a wife, children, weekly payments that crossed the border, and a pregnancy one Suze had carried and surrendered, after which Fortino had stayed with Kristina anyway. The baby was gone. He had not followed. That was the point detectives marked as the origin. Not the fire in June, not the fire in March. The moment Suze Adams gave up a child and watched the man who had fathered it return to another woman's house, that was when the accumulation had begun. Everything that came after had been moving in one direction from that point. Suze Adams had scheduled a polygraph. She believed it would prove what she could not convincingly argue. August 4 was 8 days away. The case file was complete in every dimension but one, and that dimension could not be found on paper. The sensors were on her fingertips, and the machine was already running when Suze Adams began to speak. She had come in without a lawyer. She had made the appointment herself, set the date herself, driven herself to the Turlock Police Department on the morning of August 4, 2004. The polygraph examiner attached the last sensor and asked her to breathe normally. She did. Her account came out in the same order it always had. Even. Unhurried. "We made dinner," she said. "We watched a movie. I never left." The examiner wrote it down. She did not elaborate. He noted the consistency. He had heard many alibi accounts in that room. Most people who were telling the truth stumbled slightly, corrected a word, added a detail, adjusted the sequence. Those adjustments were normal. They were the mind working through memory in real time. She did not adjust anything. Her story came out with the same weight on the same words each time she was asked to walk through it. The examiner moved to the direct questions. Did you plan or participate in setting the fire at Kristina Soult's residence on June 18, 2004? No. Did she have prior knowledge that such an act was being planned? No. Did she know what accelerant had been used? No. Her voice did not change between the baseline questions and the critical ones. That was worth noting. Most people, even innocent people, register some shift when the stakes of a question rise. The pitch drops or rises, the breathing adjusts. Suze Adams answered the direct questions the same way she answered everything else, level, clean, without hesitation. She had scheduled this herself. She had chosen this room, this date, this moment, and she was still choosing it. Still performing control in a space specifically designed to record what control costs the body. Before we hear what the machine recorded, drop a comment and tell us where you are listening from right now. If this case has stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. We will be right back. Please note what follows includes reconstructed details for narrative purposes. The documented record guides everything. The examination continued. The examiner worked through the remaining questions at the same measured pace. He did not hurry when her answers came quickly. He did not pause to let her reconsider. He asked what the protocol required him to ask, and he asked it the same way he had asked everything before. Suze Adams answered each question. The room was quiet. The machine hummed. The paper fed through at a fixed rate, line after line. Every response she gave, every breath, every pulse rate shift. Every micro change the sensors captured was being recorded in a format that did not care how steady her voice sounded. The machine was not listening to her story. It was measuring the distance between what she said and what her body knew. The examiner had asked everything he needed to ask. She had answered every one without flinching. Now someone had to read what the machine said. The examiner looked at the readout, then looked at her. He had conducted enough of these examinations to know what the numbers meant before he said them aloud. This one required no interpretation. The scale had a ceiling. The instrument did not go higher than the number on the page in front of him. He turned the readout towards Suze Adams and read it to her face. Deception indicated, he said. Probability of deception greater than 0.99. The words landed in the room without echo. Suze Adams said nothing. The examiner did not rush to fill the silence. He let the number sit. It was the kind of number that did its own work not because it was dramatic, but because there was nowhere to go with it. A score of 0.99 was not a suspicion. It was not an interpretation. It was the machine's way of saying it had run out of scale to assign. He explained what the ceiling meant. The instrument measured physiological response against a baseline. It did not know what was true. It only knew what the body did when certain questions were asked. And when the body responds the way hers had on question after question, across every critical item, the number it produces is not a judgment. It is a result. She had sat through a search warrant at her apartment. She had spent 2 weeks in another country. She had come back and walked into the police department and scheduled this examination herself. She had chosen the date, set the appointment, taken her place in the chair. She had handed them this room. She had handed them this moment. Suze Adams had walked in to end the investigation. What the polygraph ended was her alibi. For a moment, she held her expression. The face she had brought into every interaction with law enforcement, measured, cooperative, one step ahead, was still there. But something behind it had shifted. Not all at once.
I don't know that you ever get over a death, whether it's from natural causes or like this. You learn to move on, but you never get over it.
Weight does not give way all at once. It gives under pressure over time, and then it gives completely. And the moment it does, you can see exactly where the structure failed. The version of Suze Adams that had dyed her hair and come back to Turlock with a story about Mexico and nothing to hide, that version was running out of room. The examiner watched her without moving. He had read the number. The number was on the page. The page was between them, face up, on the table where she had rested her hands, while the sensors measured what her hands could not conceal. Suze Adams was still in the chair, still in the room she had booked herself into. The number was 0.99. Her face had changed. What came next would not be denial. He put the page down and stopped being an examiner. The shift was deliberate. The instrument had done what it was designed to do, produced a number. That number was now on the page. What the room needed next was something no instrument was built to provide. He did not press harder. He did not lean forward or place the readout between them again. He set the page to one side and spoke quietly, the way a person speaks when they want to reach someone who is still deciding whether to talk. He told her he did not think she was a monster. He said he believed she had been pushed past what most people could endure, that there was a shape to the years she had spent, a weight to what had been taken from her, and that the fire had started somewhere inside all of that. He said he did not believe she had meant for it to go as far as it went. "I don't think you meant for her to die," he said. "I think you were pushed past what anyone could take." Suze Adams heard him. She did not move. The page was still face up on the table. She looked at him and did not correct a word of what he said. Silence in place of a correction is its own statement. He let the moment breathe. Then he asked her one thing, not about the fire, not about the rosemary or the alcohol or the night of June 18. He asked something simpler than any of that. "Are you still with me?" The most dangerous thing in the room was not the machine. It was the quiet. Because the quiet was where the alibi should have been. In every prior conversation, every interview, every exchange with investigators since the night of June 18, there had always been an answer ready. Fortino's name, the apartment, the movie, the night she never left. She had always had the next sentence prepared before the question finished. She did not have it now. She did not repeat the alibi. She did not say Fortino's name. Whatever she had walked into the building that morning prepared to say, none of it came out. Her hands were still on the table, the examiner was still watching, the page was still between them. Suze Adams sat in the chair she had reserved for herself and said nothing. He waited. He had asked her if she was still with him, and the question had not expired. It was still in the room, between them, unfilled. The silence around it was no longer hers to shape. Weeks of consistent, layered denial had ended without a retraction, without a correction, without a single word of revision. It ended the way most performances end, not with an exit, but with a moment when the next line simply does not come. She started with the rosemary. The next line did come, and when it came, it did not sound like a confession. It sounded like a report, measured, sequential. The same cadence she had used for every alibi since June 18 now turned and applied to the truth. She said she had soaked dried rosemary in rubbing alcohol. Not the night of June 18, earlier, days earlier. "I soaked the rosemary in rubbing alcohol," she said. "I learned how to do it in Girl Scouts." That detail arrived in the room and it did not let go. A week before the fire, Suze Adams had been in her apartment preparing the accelerant. This was not a decision made in a moment of rage. It had been a project. She described what the preparation smelled like, the sharpness of the rubbing alcohol, the way the dried herb absorbed it and held the scent over several days. She had let it steep. When she was ready, she would know. On the night of June 18, she was ready. She walked to Kristina's home alone. No one with her. No one who knew. She placed the prepared rosemary at the front of the house and lit it. Then she went to the back. She lit the back porch as well. She lit both porches. She walked home. The sirens passed her on the street. She heard them before she saw the lights, the sirens moving through the dark toward the house she had just left. She kept walking. She did not run. She did not stop. The street was quiet around her, and the lights were behind her now. The apartment was quiet when she returned. Fortino was asleep. He had not moved. He did not know she had been gone. She lay down beside him. The sirens she could still faintly hear grew distant and then stopped. She fell asleep. The house was still burning when she did. Investigators had spent weeks assembling the logic of what had happened on June 18th. The splash patterns, the prepared accelerant found in the alley, the witness account from AJ's cafe, the polygraph that produced a score the instrument could not exceed. Every piece had pointed in one direction. Now that direction had a voice. Suze Adams had just given it one. She told the examiner everything, the preparation that began days before the fire, the walk she took alone, the front porch and the back porch, the sirens she heard while she was still on the street, the bed she returned to before it was over. Fortino had slept through the fire, through the arrival of the units, through the moment Joey Lopes carried his baby brother out through the smoke. He had been asleep in the apartment, the alibi she had built around both of them without his knowledge. She had been home before Kristina was found. She said she never meant for anyone to die. The confession had given investigators everything they needed about the fire. Now it gave them something the evidence alone had never provided. The space between what Suze Adams had intended and what she had done. She told the polygraph examiner the fire was supposed to frighten Kristina. That was the full extent of what she had planned. She had not expected the house to hold the way it did. She had not calculated for a woman in a bathroom at the back of a burning building who could not find her way to the front. "I didn't mean for her to die," she said. "I just wanted her to go away." The examiner wrote it down. The statement was what it was, and what it was would not help her in court. The law does not grade arson by intent when someone dies inside the fire. The law calls it murder. She had been asleep when it happened. She had learned that Kristina had not gotten out the same way most people learn such things from someone else after the fact, when the outcome was already fixed. She had not been watching from the street. She had been in her bed. She had been asleep beside Fortino, and when she woke, the fire had taken more than she had intended it to take. She said it was not what she had planned. The investigation had spent weeks building a case around what Suze Adams had just stated plainly in a room she had booked herself into, on a date she had chosen, in a building she had entered voluntarily that morning. She had come here to walk out free. The handcuffs were already in the room. Detectives entered. The examination room, which had been a contained space between two people and a machine, became a different kind of room. The formal language of an arrest was spoken. The charge was read. Suze Adams, who had driven herself to the Turlock Police Department that morning to take a polygraph she believed she could pass, was placed under arrest for the murder of Kristina Soult. She had not meant to confess. She had not meant to give investigators a witness statement. A motive, a detailed account of the preparation and the night of June 18, and an on-record admission that she had lit both porches and walked home. She had meant to clear her name. The plan she had built, the dyed hair, the Mexico alibi, the voluntary polygraph, had been designed with one exit. The exit had closed the moment she answered the first question, and everything that followed had narrowed the room to this: a woman in a chair, a charge read aloud, and a trial that would not come for 3 more years. In May 2007, a Stanislaus County courtroom would hear all of it. 3 years after the fire. Suze Adams stood in a Stanislaus County courtroom and pleaded not guilty. The trial that followed ran nearly 2 weeks. It was, in its structure, 2 competing accounts of the same woman and the same night presented to 12 people who had not been there for either. Suze Adams took the stand in her own defense. In the courtroom in Modesto, she described Kristina Soult not as a victim, but as a source of sustained harassment. She said Kristina had followed her to work. She said the calls had come in clusters, escalating in tone and frequency, and that she had not known what Kristina might do next. She followed me to work, she said. She called constantly. I was afraid of what she might do. Phone records entered into evidence confirmed what she described, that Kristina had called Suze repeatedly in the days before June 18. The calls had happened. The frequency was documented, but the records established a sequence, not a justification, and the prosecution would be the one to say so. Defense counsel asked the jury for voluntary manslaughter. Their argument was built on the doctrine of extreme emotional disturbance that Suze Adams had been pushed past what any person could absorb. Across years that included a surrendered pregnancy, a man who would not make a choice, and an ongoing campaign of harassment from the woman he would not leave. The defense said the fire was a desperate act, not a calculated one. They said the law had room for the difference. The phone record showed Kristina had called. They did not show who soaked the rosemary. The prosecution laid the timeline out without editorial comment. Suze Adams had prepared the accelerant for nearly a week before June 18. She had not driven past the house in anger, not acted in the heat of a confrontation. She had soaked dried rosemary in rubbing alcohol and let it steep. She had walked to the house alone, in the dark, and set the front of the building alight. Then she had gone to the back. Both exits, front porch and rear, had been ignited. The confession, recorded on August 4, 2004, was played for the jury in Suze Adams's own voice. Joseph Lopes had woken to the sound of breaking glass and carried his baby brother out through smoke. Michael had lost his mother. Both were present in those proceedings, not as strangers to the facts, but as the people who had lived the consequence of a plan that the defense was asking the jury to forgive. The jury had heard 2 versions of the same woman. One version had been terrorized into a single, desperate act. The other had spent a week preparing to seal every exit of a burning house. Both were built from the same documents, the same records, the same voice on the same tape. Now, 12 people had to decide which one was true. After 2 days, the jury had made up its mind. They filed back into Stanislaus County Courthouse on May 29, 2007, and took their places in the jury box. The courtroom was quiet, in a way it had not been quiet at any point during the trial. The jury foreperson stood and faced the room. The first count was first-degree murder with a special circumstance of arson. Guilty. 2 counts of arson, guilty on both. 3 counts of attempted murder, Guilty on all three. Each verdict was read into the record in the same flat, official cadence. 6 counts, 6 guilty verdicts. The foreperson's voice did not waver, and the room did not move between them. Suze Adams sat at the defense table and heard each one read in turn. She did not move. Across the courtroom, Kristina Soult's family received the verdict in a completely different register. They wept. They called out to the jurors. Gratitude and grief arrived at the same moment, and both were loud. Michael was there. Mike Vanek was there, the man who had helped investigators in the early weeks, who had been planning to leave his son with Kristina that very weekend. The people who had carried June 18 forward from the night it happened to this room had their answer. The answer was one word, spoken 6 times over, and that word was not manslaughter. She had not moved. Not when the first count was read, not when the last one was. The defense argument, extreme emotional disturbance, desperation rather than design, had not persuaded a single juror. The week of preparation was in the record. The 2 ignition points, front and back. Both exits were in the record. The confession, played in her own voice on the August 4 recording, had done what confessions do when they are specific and documented and heard in a courtroom. They remove the distance between the jury and the act. In July 2007, the presiding judge sentenced Suze Adams to life without the possibility of parole. The case had begun with an anonymous phone call to investigators. The case had begun a rosemary bush on a back porch and a Ziploc bag in an alley behind a burning house. It had moved through a polygraph room, a confession, and a courtroom, and it ended here. Nearly 3 years from the night of June 18 to a verdict. Week beyond that for the sentence. Suze Adams would not leave prison. That was the sentence, and it was final. Kristina Soult's name was in the verdict. The verdict was in the public record. The rosemary bush was in an evidence log, and the Ziploc bag was in a file. The case was formally closed, and the only thing that did not appear in any of those filings was what all of it had cost the people who had walked out of that house. Michael still had something to say about that. Michael said his mother was a giver. That was the word he kept coming back to, not because it explained anything about what happened to her, but because it was the word that was true long before any of it occurred. She gave time. She gave attention. On Sunday afternoons, she put on records and taught her son calligraphy at the kitchen table. The light came through the window, and it was ordinary in the way that most of the best things are. She had plans that were taking shape. She was not a woman waiting for her real life to arrive. She was already inside it. She was a giver, he said. That's what she was. The grandson she walked to the park every chance she had is older now. He has questions that do not have easy answers. He has a grandmother who exists in photographs and in the things other people say about her and in the name on a court document that will be in the public record far longer than he will be alive. Michael has had to find words for a woman who was supposed to still be there at the table, at the park, on the other end of the phone, and who is instead a fixed point in the past that keeps receding while the people who loved her keep moving forward. The absence has a shape. It keeps growing. Kristina Soult was 43 years old. She had Sunday plans. She had a grandson. She had a trip to Las Vegas she was never going to take. She also had, in the early hours of June 19, 2004, a clear path out of a burning house. She handed the baby to Joey first. Then she turned back toward the fire. And the bathroom at the rear of the house was where investigators found her the following morning. She had given everything she had in the last minutes she was going to have, and none of it was enough to get her out. Suze Adams had not been there. She had been in her bed, asleep beside Fortino, while the sirens moved through the dark in the direction of a fire she had spent a week preparing. She came back months later, dyed hair, a new story, a polygraph she had scheduled herself, to close the chapter she had opened, in the room she had reserved, on the date she had chosen. She could not out-talk the machine. The one thing she had no script for was her own pulse, and it confessed before she ever opened her mouth. Kristina Soult's name is on a verdict. Her grandson is growing up. The Sunday afternoons are over, but the music Michael remembers from them is not. Suze Adams is in a prison she will not leave. She had a clear path out of the investigation. She turned away from it. That is the story of Kristina Soult, a woman who spent her Sundays making something beautiful, and who never came home from one of them. What the case leaves behind is not just a verdict. It is a reminder that ordinary lives carry extraordinary weight. A woman who kept calligraphy ink on her hands and Sunday afternoons for the people she loved. She deserved more Sundays. Jealousy unchecked does not stay quiet. It makes plans. It waits. And when it finally moves, it leaves behind a family with questions that no courtroom can fully answer. If this story stayed with you, please leave a comment below. Tell us what you are thinking right now. And if you know someone who follows true crime, share this with them. These cases deserve to be remembered. Subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. This story is based on real events. Some scenes have been dramatized to help bring the timeline to life, but the core facts, the crime, the investigation, and the conviction are documented in the public record. Our deepest respect goes to Kristina Soult's family and to everyone who loved her.